And thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's a pleasure to share some of our work, and I can tell from a lot of blue lanyards in here that I think we have folks from the wider Trimble universe than just SketchUp folks, but I'd love to see a show of hands. Does anyone in here operate laser scanners as part of their work? Great. So I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm not going to train you on anything in terms of how to use point cloud software, but I am going to show you a lot of detail about how we use it as part of our workflow, and including the Scan Essentials plugin, and just getting evidence collected in a variety of ways and putting it into a SketchUp model to learn more about crime scenes and forensics. And there are other opportunities to get training on the Scan Essentials plugin at SketchUp 3D Basecamp. So that's out there, but today we're going to talk mainly about forensics and what we do at Fat Pencil Studio to, to really understand those stories. So let me tell you briefly about myself before we jump in any further. First of all, Fat Pencil Studio, if you haven't heard of us, we are a design firm based in Portland, Oregon, and we specialize in using visual stories to help attorneys and other legal professionals make a better case. And my background is in civil engineering and architecture, so I think when I mention to people that I draw crime scenes for a living, they kind of say, well, how'd you do that transition? That's a bit strange. And it really came down to the work that I was doing at first when I started Fat Pencil Studio back in 2004, was primarily real estate work, and that all went away in 2007. So because of the recession, and I had to scramble a little bit and find other things to do. And I actually had a chance to work for some diagrams on an eminent domain case for the first time, and just some really crude Google Earth renderings of different assumptions about massing for a building and how that related to the value of a property. The economist that I was working for felt like that would be a little bit easier for a jury to grasp than his spreadsheets that he was working with. And so the upshot of that, though, is he introduced me to his clients at the Portland City Attorney's Office, and we got to work together on a civil rights case, which was a man that was tackled in the middle of the street and ended up dying in the back of a police car. Very bad political case for the city, and and a lot of witnesses of this event. Although, because it was 2009, strangely, the only photographic evidence that witnesses produced was this one picture of the scene. We were able to, though, create a 3D model to both map in what we learned from that photograph, and also, more importantly, use it in real time with the city to help understand what witnesses might have seen from a different perspective. It's set up for use in federal court. Let's see if I can get out of this here and go to SketchUp. And we had it set up with the evidence presentation in federal court. If you need to put the camera at a particular location where the witness says they were, we can zoom down to that location and ask if this is what they saw. They might say, yeah, that's right, but that squad car, I don't think that had gotten there yet. We can hide that. We can move people over a little bit if they had a different position. All this is able to do in real time. I thought we were going to do it mainly in court. It turned out we used it dozens of times with witnesses, with other parties, with risk management, and ultimately they settled the case on the eve of jury selection. But this case really opened my eyes to the potential for how useful these kinds of tools can be working on court cases. So, fast forward to today. We're located in Portland, Oregon, like I said. If you're familiar with the city, we're on Northeast Sandy Boulevard, just about a mile from downtown. And we have 9 people on staff now, a mixture of experience between art, film, architecture, construction, and actually 5 of those people are here with us at Basecamp. So if you see any of these folks in the hallway, please say hello for me. We work on a whole bunch of different types of cases, nearly 1,000 since we started doing legal work in 2009. So that's civil cases, anything from personal injury to medical malpractice and civil rights. And on criminal cases, we've done things as small as DUI and certainly done capital murder cases as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is visual stories, and I'm going to focus on three elements of how we go about creating those stories. The first I'm going to think about is scanning and also other ways of capturing data, and then what do you do when we get that into SketchUp, and finally say some words about accuracy and admissibility in court. Because if you're talking about litigation, there's always a chance that things that we would produce are going to need to be used in court, and we have to be prepared to support that and for these to have foundation for admissibility. And I've got lots of case studies, and I will say we're a pretty small group here, so at any time, if you have questions, just raise your hand, and I'd love to address it then, and we'll have a couple minutes for questions at the end as well. So let's talk first about scanning and what does that produce. And this is from a case we were actually using reality capture software to process the point cloud for this case. And you can see the inside of a house here. And right away, if you're used to looking at point clouds, you kind of understand what you're looking at. And you can see a crime scene with some placards. But it's not always easy if you're not used to looking at point clouds to know what you're looking at. And in particular, this point was driven home to me for the first time. I went to some crime scene reconstruction conferences for the ACSR and also the IAFSM, which is a forensics professionals. All folks that do laser scanning. I saw some incredible work that people were doing documenting crime scenes, sometimes shootings that happened over the course of multiple blocks. And I went up to some of them at lunch and said, these are so great as far as documenting what happened in this incident. How are the attorneys using it? When you bring it to the DA, what do they do with it? And the guy's like, well, they don't really know what to do with it. They come look at it on our computer, and then they go away and do their work, and maybe we show it in court. But part of the reason for that, well, there's really three reasons. One is a technology gap. So you have all the files associated with these scans that are living on your computer, and then you got to get them into sort of the cloud and the evidence, and you would get it over to the attorneys, and they don't know what all these files are. They can't open them on their computer. It might be several gigabytes or more worth of information. So there's a barrier as far as just the technology goes to having other folks working on these cases understand and use this material. And then there's a big difference as far as expertise too. And so we'll have a little test here. I want to know, well, first of all, is anyone in this room a doctor or a radiologist? Okay, so if you're not a radiologist, does anyone know what we're looking at? Heart? Okay. What was your clue about this is a heart?
Right ventricle, left ventricle.
Yeah, that helps a little bit, right? What about this? That helps a little bit more. And so, if you don't give people a clue what they're looking at with these point clouds, it can be very difficult to figure out and have some context for it. And then the final gap that exists between what you collect as far as the raw data at a crime scene and how you might use this with a case is the storytelling aspect. Because as great as the software is at collecting and registering point clouds and measuring and maintaining accuracy, there's a question about how easy is it to layer in the storytelling elements. I know there's some capabilities with that. We found that SketchUp is a great tool for not only adding things to a crime scene, but also adjusting in real time the positions of those things, looking at it from different perspectives, understanding visibility and trajectories and that sort of thing. So those are the three reasons that we've decided that SketchUp is really great for our purposes to help bridge that expertise gap from the data that was collected to using it with legal teams. And I want to share this first case study, which is an incident that happened in a home in Oregon. A gentleman had come from out of state to collect on a bad debt, was hoping to get the money or at least enough drugs worth the money. And it was kind of a home invasion type of situation. They're in a standoff, and we had this good laser scan of the house. It allowed us to collect some critical measurements. You'll see why this is important in a moment. And let me switch over to that model now. So here's the house. And what had happened is the yellow guy just came back and implied that he just offed the son of orange guy and blue woman. And that did not go over well. And the orange guy confronts the guy with the gun, this guy in teal, and reaches for the gun and ends up sort of pushing him down, and then there's a shot fired. And there's these witnesses here, and green guy says, this is what I saw here. Green guy said he saw this. Square up, shoot him right in the head. And then orange guy goes down, and that's where they found him at the scene. So the story of the guy in teal is different, of course. He says, okay, I was actually hitting against this door jamb, and the way we got that information is because we went in with the defense team to a contact visit at the jail where he was being held. And it's one thing to sort of explain it in a few words, but it was a lot easier to get the detail when we could look at it in close up and actually move things around. So for example, we have on the back of, see if I can turn on our handles here. So these mannequins all have points that can be adjusted. So if I need to, in real time, change the position of the hand, we can do that per the direction of a person that we're working with. It's not easy to do a lot of fine detail, like making fists and that kind of thing in the moment. But because we can make a lot of those adjustments in real time, it enables us to get more information and then ultimately to prepare diagrams that can be used to tell that story. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we favor redrawing these models when, in theory, we already have a 3D model if you've scanned the scene, right? Like, why would you redo that if you've already scanned it and you've scanned it so accurately? And what it comes down to is that, just because you have the scan doesn't necessarily mean you understand the space. And one of the things I learned in architecture school is there's value in drawing a space. Even in retracing floor plans from a building that that's already been designed, you learn things. And certainly when you work on your own design, you learn things. And that design process is often more valuable than what the end product is. So as that kind of fits into our philosophy of forensics, is such that by creating this digital model, you then have a tool that you can map out what you know and look at it from different perspectives in a way that's easy to collaborate with a large number of people. And one of the things that became clear to us early on is that it's great if you have a point cloud and you can measure off that, but you don't necessarily need to have scanned a scene in order to have a 3D model. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data sources that we rely on when we're creating a model of a scene, and oftentimes we use more than one. So of course, for this model that we're going to look at, this case study, we're going to see a house. You can look at Google Street View and see in different years what that looked like from the street. We make quite a bit of use of a company called Nearmap, and they have aerial photos. Just like you can grab aerial photographs with the add location feature using SketchUp, it's also possible to import these Nearmap photos. We like them because they tend to be a little bit higher resolution, and they're definitely more frequent revisits to their flights. So we have a couple options per year, sometimes more in big cities, to choose from that'll get us close to the date of the actual event. And also sometimes the shadows are different days, and you can see different things based on what was the shadows in the aerial photograph on that day. If there's a police report, there's sometimes diagrams that were drawn of the inside of a house. That can be really helpful in terms of determining the layout of rooms, although they're often not to scale, so you can't really rely on the measurements. We watch body cam video quite a bit now of the first investigation of a scene. Again, it's not going to be things you can measure off of, but it does tell us how the rooms in a house are arranged, which is pretty helpful. And then if we do get to visit the scene, even if there was no scan done, we can go in with a tape measure and collect the measurements that we'll need to create a model. We can take photographs that are useful to us as far as in terms of, maybe there's less clutter in the house than there was on the day of the crime. Maybe we can take sort of elevation straight on shots. Ultimately, we're going to figure out how can we learn as much as we need to learn to make the best model we can make given the information we have. So one of the things we use is architectural standards. And if we know, for example, the height of a door, and the door is in the same plane as a window, we can scale off of this photograph to figure out how tall that window is. And there's a lot of things in a building that you'd be surprised that you might know the size of. And I'm just curious if we could brainstorm a little bit here, what some of those things are. So, I said doors, doors in residential is often 6'8", and they're usually like 30 inches for interior or 36 inches for exterior doors. Typical. I mean, it's not every door is like that, but you guess that's common. What else is a standard that you might know? And chime in if you can think of anything in a building that's you see it in a photograph, you probably know the size of it.
Stairway.
Stairway. Okay. And what are some common things for stairways?
48 inches.
48 inches wide. And then there's variety of sort of rise and run that it could be. But if you're thinking about it, it's probably 6 or so, maybe 7, depending on. So it could be like 7-11 rise and run, or something similar. Could be 6'12". What else? Soffit. So how much do those stick out typically?
24.
24, 18. Okay. Say again?
Ceiling height.
Ceiling height. What's typical for that?
8 foot to 10 foot.
Yeah. Those are nice houses. I see 7 foot a lot in where there's crime scene, but that's just the quality of the construction. 7 to 9 feet is very typical. What else? Counter height. Okay, how much? 30 inches. Okay. Anything else? CMU. How big is CMU? Concrete masonry unit. 8 by 16. I spent lots of time counting CMU in the wall to figure out how wide or tall it is. Anything else? I'll put in appliances, like anything you can look up a serial number on, and you're pretty sure you know what that is. That could be useful. So there's a lot of stuff that you'll see in photographs that will give you a clue on how big things are. And ultimately, when you put that into, I had a couple other things on here I wanted to mention as potential sources. So if the house has been sold, you probably can go online to Redfin or Zillow or Trulia or one of these real estate sites and find photos of that house. Maybe not right when the crime was committed, but the rooms probably didn't change. Yes? Okay. Okay. And that's been really helpful for us. Sometimes we're asked to make a model of a house that we can't visit and we don't have many photographs of, but there's still a lot that can be done based on what you can find online as a starting point. And so in this particular house, let me pull this up now. So there's that unit. It's a quarter of that larger building that I showed you before. We were able to place all this furniture. It's not super detailed. It's really there mostly for context. Like, I don't really care how deep the sink was, for example. It's just to know that there was a kitchen there and that there's a bathroom here. And most importantly in this house, when we get these guys coming in, and we'll just kind of look at the full sequence here, knocking at the door, confronting blue guy, and they corner him in the bedroom while the other guy over here is holding this guy, the burnt orange guy at gunpoint. Are they seeing what's happening in the bedroom? Because if if this guy says, well, I saw that this, that my roommate, went after him, he's not going to see anything in the bedroom from there. And so it's a way to help understand the, the potential scenarios that might have happened, and then use that to determine a strategy for how you want to pursue the case. What additional evidence do you need? What can you have your investigators talk to witnesses about? Ultimately, if you do go to trial, what's your strategy for cross-examination on different witnesses? And then, how do you want to explain the story so that it's a little bit more credible than what might come out in words? We work on cases a lot where the witness might not be all that credible, but they do want someone to testify to avoid getting kind of mixed up and telling a convoluted story. Having a series of images to explain can be a much more helpful way to tell a story to the jury. So in this case, machete guy is chasing out and then catches blue guy in the head, and then ultimately they kill him here on the ground, and then orange guy gets up and runs. So that's the sequence of events for that. But developing that was really useful with the team of attorneys and investigators to make sure that they understood what the big picture of this case was and figure out, do they want to advise their client to take a plea deal? Is there a reasonable chance of getting other witnesses to impeach them on the stand? Those kind of questions. So part of the job was getting the apartment modeled accurately, because you need to have that accuracy to know that it's a credible story, and that when you want to see if you could see something from a certain spot, that's a reasonable thing to do. But part of it is also laying in these movable elements, the human figures, the weapons. If it's an outside thing, there's often cars. Where did the cars come into the play? So those are all items that we'll need to talk about when we get to the next section. But first I want to talk a little bit about what do we do with point cloud data when we do get that, because oftentimes we don't have it at the beginning, but we'll get it soon, and how do we bring that into the case? So I'm going to look for a bit at this case study where we're talking about an event that happens in a residential neighborhood. There were shots fired from a small attic that end up striking a neighbor in the house. And we had a lot of laser scans for this project. You can see there was dozens. And we have for a long time used Autodesk Recap mainly as a way to take scans that come from different vendors. Trimble, Faro, Leica is not great for opening and recap, but trying to get scans from different places and figure out how do we get those registered if they are not already registered. How do we crop it down to what we need? We can adjust the point size as we need to, and do things like measure from side to side. For this case, we needed to know how far apart the houses were, and more critically, like what's the difference in elevation. And then another great thing to do, and you can do this in your native Trimble software, RealWorks, or you could do it in a program like Recap, is being able to jump into these orbs where there's a 360 photo taken and then measure off of something that's a little bit more high def as far as the materials of the structure, as opposed to just looking at a point cloud. And then of course at any time you can jump back into the 3D point cloud and check different perspectives. So that's sometimes where we start with point cloud data, but then we're often going to export that data in the E57 format so that we can bring it into the Scan Essentials plugin for SketchUp Studio. And a few of the things that we do with that, you can see you can import the data, you can change the opacity of that point cloud data, so you're seeing and how that appears in relation to the geometry in your 3D model. It's pretty easy to draw a bounding box and then bring that over to the area of your model that you want to crop in, although we notice that sometimes that the bounding box might be different than the edges of the geometry, and so it takes a little finessing to get that right. And then once you've got that loaded and registered with your model, it's possible to Yeah, you can move the points around a little bit to fine tune it and get it to match up with your geometry. Or you might be starting with the points and then modeling geometry on top of the 3D point cloud. One thing to keep in mind as you do that is while you can snap to all the points in your point cloud as you're drawing, they're not necessarily coplanar, those points. They might be close to coplanar, but they're probably not exactly coplanar. So that's where you might need to use other tools. One thing that we've used a little bit is this ground mesh workflow, where you can create a ground mesh that matches the terrain, which is pretty good, although if there's sort of clutter, you end up with some of these mounds somewhere that are actually the artifacts of tree stumps or other stuff that's not necessarily the ground. But there's a lot of good stuff in here to work with if you want to have material that you have in a point cloud as a guide for the work that you're going to do in SketchUp. And depending on the project, sometimes we do this right away. Other times we might feel like it's easier to just model based on other resources and then check the point cloud measurements for specific important measurements. And then for this project, for this case, the big deal was, okay, so this guy's in his attic firing a rifle over at the neighbor's house. You can see all the bullet strikes on the neighbor's house. We kind of zoom in here. And the question is, was he intending to try to kill someone in there? Because he's charged with attempted murder. Or is this just a guy with a mental crisis that's in his attic firing a weapon indiscriminately? And unfortunately, the neighbor got hit. And one of the things we needed to understand is what is the story that the neighbor told about where they were and what could the guy in the attic have seen from his window. And that's where we ended up with this diagram, because the neighbor indicates they came out of their back bedroom and were walking toward the front door at the time they got hit. Whereas the view from the attic really covered just the kitchen area. And so right away, even though we did this model without originally having a point cloud, we kind of knew that it was pointing towards there's no possible way that the shooter could have seen the person that got hit, because that was not the area of the house they were in. One thing, and let me just go ahead and bring that up so we can look at it a little more carefully. So with these, let's find the cursor. There it is.
What data did you use to place the shooter's position?
So we didn't know the shooter's position. And this is a good question about what data could we use to place the shooter's position. Sometimes we work with ballistics experts, and they might have an opinion. Let's say, for the sake of argument, if a shotgun was fired and you see a pattern of pellet strikes, they might have an opinion on the distance from which that pattern was created. But in this case, as with a rifle, you probably could have made those marks from a variety of places in that attic. Maybe they would look at the bullet holes and have a suggestion on what angle those shots were fired from. But that wasn't really the question that was being asked in this case. So mostly it was for illustration purposes, understanding that he's going to be up here somewhere looking through the window, and the question was, what are his sight lines? Because that was the attorneys were mainly interested in is, can we get the attempted murder charge dropped and then negotiate a plea deal around the rest of it. And one of the big deals is like, okay, where is this window in relation to this window here? So that was the kinds of things we were very interested in. And when we got the point cloud, we were adjusting those aspects of the model to be more accurate, just to make sure that it didn't change the answer. But because of the distance between this front doorway and where this view box is going to be, we kind of knew it early in the case that it was not going to be a possibility of seeing someone in the hallway just based off of even the slightly lower accuracy of creating a model with no point cloud data. But it's a common thing we would do is just start, and then when we get the higher accuracy data, figure out what do we need to adjust to answer the questions as accurately as possible. Any other questions about sort of this setup on this case study? One of the things that we do a lot of is, mapping out bullet strikes. We have a handy dynamic component that we created for evidence markers, both these little placards that sit on a wall, and also these. This one just uses placards too. But we have sort of triangular placards that stand up by themselves, and it's handy to be able to just drop those in, and then you can go in and into here and change the nomenclature.
Do you try to match those with the photos? If you have photos of actually that are taken, do you match those?
So the question is, if we had photos of the evidence markers, what do we try to do to match those? In this case, I think they actually measured out the location of the bullet strikes, so we use those measurements. If they don't, then we're going to work with the photos. And what do we see in that photo that provides some reference that we can locate that evidence marker? Sometimes it's a stripe in a parking lot. Sometimes it's counting the number of planks on the siding. And we're going to get as close as we can. But then ultimately, what we want to be able to do is also have those photos handy. So if we're going to mark this with A, we probably have a folder of photos somewhere where we can label it marker A. And when the discussion happens, and this is really the value of doing this work early in a case, is that you get the attorney and the investigators, the criminalist, the forensic expert, whoever, on a call together. They need to discuss it. They want to be able to see these things and understand and not have to hunt through 250, 500 photographs to find it. And so, having that all set up and organized is really a benefit in terms of getting progress made on the cases. And I was just going to show, like, you can, these dynamic components, we have a thing where you can go in and change the options. So if we wanted to have a different color here, we can make that, white. And then we can change the letter to a J. So it's just a quick way of matching up with what you see in the scene. And we're hoping at some point to add a feature to this where you could actually include media in those markers as well, like a photograph, like a video. And SketchUp doesn't make it real easy to have external links out of those to reference a photo set somewhere, but we're working on it. So if anyone knows a way to do that, feel free to come over and talk to me afterwards, because that's definitely would be a useful tool for us to not have to maintain a directory on our computer somewhere and then bring those up separately, but actually be able to offer this with an online link and have the media already embedded would be a really great extra feature to add. Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about admissibility. And one of the things that we always start with is what a judge would start with if they are ruling on whether something is admissible to be shown in court, and that is it relevant, accurate, and fair? So most of the times the work we're going to be doing is relevant, but there's a question about the accuracy, and there could be any number of things that are used to measure a site. But one thing I always push back against if I get cross-examined on it, and someone will say, how do you know this is exactly right? And I would say it's definitely not exactly right, because there is no such thing as exact. Every measurement tool is going to have some level of precision associated with it. And the important question is not necessarily how precise is it. The question is it precise enough to answer the question that's being asked? And so that's always the mindset we're going to go in with. And part of the great thing about doing the 3D model work and drawing it yourself is it necessarily is going to tell you, actually, can I answer the question that's being asked with this level of precision, or do we need to go out and get more information? Or maybe tell the attorney, hey, I understand you would like this to be true, but the reality is it's not beyond the margin of error for this particular measurement method. And so that's going to have to be the answer. That happens a lot with video footage, by the way, where you see this grainy video footage and they say, oh, I can definitely see him with the gun, Well, you're going to have to find that evidence elsewhere because that, sort of, pixelated shape, it could be anything. It could be a gun, it could be lots of stuff. And so, it's always a question about how precise is the measurements, the information you're working with, and will it answer the question. So when we go in and prepare material for court, and really even from the beginning, we have these questions in mind. Are we using the best information available? If there's a laser scan, we want to see it. We want to see if there's anything in there that we could use. But if we don't have that, what else can we use to help answer those questions? And then this came up before. How do we know where that person with a rifle is? Anything time there's a movable object that wasn't in the scan, what's our basis for knowing where that object is? And the final piece is like I was mentioning. Do we have enough accuracy to answer the question, and being able to know what the margin of error for any given measurement method is, and therefore make a decision about whether it's a reasonable way to answer the question. For this case, like I said, we modeled it once at the beginning of the case when we did not have a laser scan, and you'll see that on the left of your screen. And then we modeled it again with the laser scan. And we could do this like this puzzle. What do we see as far as differences here? The roof shape. I saw you making that motion. What else is different?
Car position.
The car position, and and I think the car is a little bit bigger on the right.
Your window size.
The window size and position. Yeah, that's the three big ones.
And your deck looks wider on the left.
The deck is wider. We'll zoom in on that. Yep. So narrow the deck a little bit. Change the window size and position. So,
On the lower porch,
what's that?
what is the thing on the lower porch, the sort of Amazon delivery curve?
Yeah, what is that? Let's see. So we got I think that was a refrigerator there, and then, I don't know if this is a barbecue. This falls into the category of, if we're looking at the point cloud, we would know exactly what it was. So we wanted to represent something there that took up that space, but it wasn't really part of the story. And what we are often doing is putting in enough detail to understand the story, but we don't want to put in too much detail to be distracting, and to, like, especially if we put the details incorrectly and someone points out that that's wrong. It's the wrong brand of grill or whatever. So like when you see us putting people in these models, they're very low detail. So they might be gendered, male or female. They might be a specific height. But beyond that, there's not a lot of detail then. There's no face, there's no ears, there's no muscles, there's no fat. And the problem, and we often get asked, oh, can you make this person like a 5'4", 250. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that because we don't really have a good way to represent that accurately. It's going to start to look creepy if we just try to. Like we could make this person. I could sort of start to like, change their. It's going to look weird, and there's lots of really talented animators at studios like Pixar that do a great job at making human figures look pretty darn convincing, and I guarantee you they have a bigger budget than what we do for their work. So, and beyond that, we just don't know oftentimes. Like, one of the things we'll do on cases when we have injuries that are present in a particular victim is map the injuries onto the body. If there's a entry and exit wound, we'll put a rod through, and then once we have that in place, we can pose that person and work with a ballistics expert who has the proper expertise to testify about that, to figure out what position might they have been in at the time the shots were fired. But do we know exactly what the length of somebody's forearm is? Probably not. We don't have a scan of their body. So we have to do the best we can with the information we have available, which is oftentimes notes in a medical examiner's report, photos of an autopsy, and that's still going to be more helpful than not having it at all, because we can use those images with the forensic experts, with the attorneys, to come up with that scenario that seems likely to them of where this person was when those shots were fired, or what sequence the shots were fired in, what so. Okay. So end result, if this witness had said, I was in the kitchen washing dishes and I got shot in the side, then it would be likely that this, that this could have been a potential attempted murder situation, especially if all the shots had been right around that window. But because the witness didn't say that, and because all the shots were sort of scattered everywhere, the attorneys in this case were able to get that attempted murder charge removed, and then work on a plea bargain to get this thing settled without having to go to trial. And that's a lot of the work we do. I mean, we do end up going to trial, and I testify sometimes in trial, but most cases settle. And there's a huge value in doing this work, even if your side doesn't necessarily like the answer that it comes up with. It can help, get two sides closer to make an agreement. And I've got a few things I wanted to say in conclusion, but we have some time for questions, and I'd love to, yeah, go ahead.
On that, do you have to provide your model to both prosecutor and defense?
So the question is, do we have to provide this model to both the prosecutor and the defense? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. For one thing, it depends on the jurisdiction, because different jurisdictions, state and federal, have different rules about discovery. And there might be a need, and sometimes you have depositions or expert discovery or reports that are required, and then we may end up showing at least, if not the entire model, a series of exports of what we would be prepared to testify about if we went to trial, and have that disclosed well in advance. Other states, like Oregon, they don't have that same level of requirement for disclosing every bit of opinion that you would testify about, or every bit of work that you testify about in advance. But if you don't disclose it in advance, you're at a higher risk of just getting objections, and then the judge having to make kind of a snap judgment about whether this kind of newfangled thing that they've never seen before is going to be allowable. And maybe you don't want that uncertainty. Maybe it's better to figure out what's the most complete way you could disclose this, this information to the other side early enough that there's a chance to work out any differences about whether it's going to be, if and how it's going to be used in trial. But I want to just elaborate on that on one more point, and that is the model itself. Do we send the model itself? And the answer is sometimes yes. There's no reason. We've put the SketchUp file in a disclosure or discovery to the other side, along with a link to the SketchUp viewer, so they can have a way to look at it, and then they can decide how much they want to use that. Maybe they have somebody that understands the stuff that could do a lot of stuff with it. But most likely they just say, okay, that's nice. They've got a 3D model, and then they think about whether that's important for the points that they want to make in court, and go from there. There was one case where this was a bus crash case in Las Vegas, and the attorney really wanted to do this kind of real-time 3D modeling during direct examination in trial, so he could kind of talk to the jury about various scenarios and have the bus and the bicycle that got hit moving around as he went through those scenarios. And they had a big discussion with the judge and opposing counsel about this. And then ultimately the ruling was, okay, plaintiff's attorney, you can do that as long as you give the defense attorney the same opportunity to question Mr. Cohen in the same way. So I had a fun sort of 2-hour live modeling session during court. But yeah, I'll tell you that the jury was pretty into it. And so I would definitely do that again. But that's unusual. Most judges do not like seeing things on the screen where they don't know exactly what it's going to be beforehand. And so I think that for the most part in our work, what we do is this type of real-time design work, real-time visualization, it's most useful at the early stages in a case, when you can sort of sit with your team and make sure everyone's on the same page, and really dial in what the different scenarios are, potentially use it with witnesses to get more information, and then come up with how you want to present that in court, which might be part of a PowerPoint show, or a poster board that you put up and have people point things out. What else? Yes, question.
On this case, are you using your own laser scan data or are you using law enforcement?
So question is whether we use our own laser scan data or law enforcement, and we don't own a laser scanner, so it's not our own. When we get laser scan data, it's often from law enforcement, and for those of you in here that are involved with law enforcement, I would encourage you, if possible, to package all the actual scans and not just the web version, the Scene to Go or the True View version, because while it, in theory makes it easier for any party to open them up, in practice, the vendors don't always update their their web viewer patch. Sorry, the agencies don't always update their software to include the latest sort of web technology, and then I go to try to open it and I don't have the correct DLLs or it just doesn't work. And then beyond that, it's not the actual 3D data, it's sort of a processed version of it. So we can't open it and measure off it from any angle. We're limited only to those views that are part of that web package.
And if requested, we just export it in E57.
I mean, if everyone did that, I would sing hallelujah.
Because we use something similar you do. We use Trimble Reveal, and the Smart Room feature creates a product kind of like what you're doing, not as pretty as that.
Mm-hmm. So the comment is that you're able to use Trimble Reveal to do some of this work to show important rooms, measurements, potentially add some people, and then you can also export the data in 357, which is E57 format, which is great because it's interoperable among a whole bunch of different platforms. Some agencies we've talked to or decided to say we're not going to do it, but in general, we've had good success with if we need to coming back and asking for the E57 format version, and then we're able to open that no matter what, even if it's in a proprietary format originally when it was discovered. And then the other thing I will say is that there's ways to get information beyond just scanning. Like we do have a drone that we go out and fly sometimes. There's tools that you can use to collect good measurement data even if you weren't at the scene. But of course, if on a criminal case, if law enforcement went to the scene, that's going to be the best available data. That's the closest to the actual event that we're going to want to use.
You mentioned that earlier in your career you were working in construction and not in this forensics. You mentioned just now that sometimes you get autopsy photographs and reports and whatnot. How do you mentally transition from construction drawings to people with machetes chasing?
Yeah, how will I mentally transition from the construction, sort of transportation planning, real estate work to gruesome, horrific crime scenes? And I'd say it can be challenging. But then I go to a conference like the ACSR, Association for Crime Scene Reconstruction, and they have an event. They call it the Last Peace Society, where they present difficult cases they've worked on. Maybe they've recently solved them. Maybe they're looking for ideas on a cold case for what else could we do, because we haven't been able to make progress. And I went to this evening presentation. People were get up and just show ad hoc, show a quick slideshow, and some of the worst awful crime scenes I've seen. And they're doing this right after dinner. I mean, how do you guys do this? It's brutal. But there are some things that I am thankful for. And one is that we have a level of separation from this. They're not people in our family. I don't know these people. If it was somebody related to me, we wouldn't be working on that case. And I think that the attorneys that we work with, they're much closer to their clients, and that can be difficult. But yeah, sometimes we work on cases. There's cases with child abuse, sexual abuse, and obviously terrible, gruesome crimes. And one of the things that we've had to do as a company is make sure that as we go out to hire, we're very, very clear up front the kinds of things that we work on, and that we don't apply any kind of political or moral tests when someone comes to us and asks us to work on a case. I mean, we won't work on it if we have a conflict, but we're not going to come and say, well, we don't do child abuse cases, sorry, or this guy's a white supremacist. We're not going to work on that defense. We just believe that everyone has a constitutional right to have their side heard in court, both the crime victims for the prosecution and also the defendants. And we're going to do the best job we can to tell that story. And if we do a good job, either the resolution will get reached or it goes to trial and there's a judgment. And hopefully that judgment sticks because it was a strong case that was put and it wasn't like inadequate representation. And then finally, we have a larger team now. We have 9 people. So sometimes someone will say, hey, I've worked on 6 murder cases in the past half a year. Can I take a break from that? Or, I really don't feel comfortable working on this sexual abuse case with a teenage girl. And that's fine. Like, we have multiple people so that we can support each other and let people opt out of an individual case if they need to. Yeah, back corner.
You mentioned before that in architecture school you learned that the actual action of recreating something is an intellectual component. You told in the context of the difference between using a scan and recreating the model. Can you deeper dive a little bit on that? So, for example, is there a story of in recreating the scene, the action of doing the recreation taught you something that you never picked up at home?
Yeah, so the question is about this drawing to learn concept, and can I give some more examples of how the process of creating these 3D models helped us learn more about a case. So for sure, taking a 3D model of a scene and working with a witness, every time we learn more. Sometimes it's because the witness doesn't speak English, and so everything that they had told as far as statements had been through an interpreter before. And then we're able to show them a 3D model and say, well, were you over here or over here? How, and what position was your hand in, up or down? And then we can just do that in front of them and they can just say yes, no, point this much, that way some more. And people sometimes try to give feedback about an event in distances. Like, oh, I was about 10 feet away, or this happened for about 5 seconds, and then this happened. People have terrible judgments about distance and time. Everyone's perception of those things is different as well. So I might say to you, well, this happened for 5 seconds, and somebody else might think that was an eternity, and someone else might think that was really quick. So being able to demonstrate those things visually is always useful. And then I'll show you one other. See if I can pull this off of our website here. We're in Las Vegas, right? So there's this Las Vegas bus case that I mentioned that we had to do the live modeling for. And one of the things that happened in this case, and you'll see there's this bus coming across. This is the Red Rocks Casino intersection in front. And then the bus comes through the intersection, and right here is the body of a bicyclist who just got hit. But because that darn palm tree is in the way, it's hard to tell really what happened. What was the circumstance of that collision? All we know is the aftermath. And we had this video from the beginning, but it was just a mystery as far as what happened. We did a lot of work modeling on the different theories of the case, visibility, what if they would have had advanced collision detection, what if they would have had a safety mechanism in front of that back wheel that ended up being the thing that killed that cyclist. There was talk about air pressure on this bus and how that might have sucked them into the place where the collision occurred. But then ultimately with the model, what we were able to do once we had the work of the experts and sort of looked in and had an idea for where the collision on the bus, where the initial bus collision happened and where the person finally ended up. Then we took a closer look at this camera, matched what we knew from the 3D model to the camera, and we were able to figure out, oh, that's where he was, that's where the collision was. And we were able to look at the individual frames of that, here they are. So we were able to look at these frames really closely and determine that actually you do see this little profile of a bicycle here. And all the experts ultimately agreed that's what that was. That's the bicycle right there. But I never would have seen that. In fact, I didn't see that the first 40 times I watched the video. So it's sort of knowing what to look for and realizing, oh, that little dark spot, it cannot be explained by the bus not getting washed. It cannot be explained by the leaves of the tree because they weren't moving in the same way. It has to be the bicycle. So that's just, there's a ton to learn from this process, and yeah, you just have to see where it takes you. So since we need to get out of here, let me finish. I got a concluding thought here, and that comes back to what we heard in the keynote at the beginning of the day, this idea of be curious, not judgmental. And the thing is, the judgment in a court case, it should happen at the end. It should happen, with a judge or a jury. But so often what we see in cases is the judgment happening with the investigators at the very beginning. I have an idea what I think happened. I'm going to look for evidence that fits that narrative. They're not curious. And, at best, it's sort of a missed opportunity to be more prepared for trial and what the other side might throw at you. And at worst, it ends up people getting locked up for crimes they didn't commit. And so, what we really say is don't wait until the end and make all these graphics at the end to fit your narrative that you've sort of prejudged, but bring in someone who's a visual expert who can do the modeling based off of the evidence we've collected and collaborate, and hopefully it ends up you're able to reach a settlement without having to go to court. So you're going to work with a ton of people in these cases because these days we have lots of people to collaborate with. You're probably collaborating with other investigators, attorneys, experts, and we all see a different part of the case, and it's easy to get bogged down and not see the big picture. But the beauty of having a tool like SketchUp where you can map out the scenes and understand the big picture is it gets you a lot better prepared to collaborate, hopefully get a resolution, but if not, you're going to be very well prepared for trial. And thanks so much for your time today. I'm happy to stick around if people have extra questions and answer those, and have a great rest of your conference.